Hello, this is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 12 of The Grief of Politics. I am here with Avin Carroll. Avin, how are you doing?
Doing great. Good afternoon.
Yeah, we're doing this on the day that it's due. So a lot like high school, I'm doing something. No, we both just had time to do it then. My choice this month was climate change. So we're going to talk about climate change, and I just want to start out by saying that if you guys would be so kind, go over to The Grief of Politics, www.thegriefofpolitics.com. Leave a comment. This episode will post on the 20th of every month, but you can leave a comment below the episode, or if you want us to talk about something or have a recommendation, stuff like that, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or the Google Play Store. I think we're on the Google Play Store. I need to work on that a little bit. But go to iTunes, and then obviously tell your friends about it, like Avin always says. I always forget to say that. And you can reach both Avin and I at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Let us know what episode you want to comment about, or if you have a suggestion for another show, let us know there. Or you can just let us know how we're doing, or how you feel about the show, stuff like that. And if you want, we can read it out on the show. I'm trying to think what else. I am at JustLittleJoe on Twitter, so if you want to interact with me there, you can. I don't know, Avin, you don't have a Twitter handle, do you? You don't do the Twitter that much, do you?
I actually do have one, but
What?
I do not use it very often.
Okay, well, yes. They could probably do a name search. Anyway, if you do write us at GWG Podfellows, or if you contact us on Twitter, at least let us know it's about The Grief of Politics, and again, what episode you're talking about, because I use that for the other podcasts I do, so I just want to be clear so I don't cut someone off or not understand what someone's talking about. So, yeah, this month was my choice, and I picked climate change, and I just want to say before we started, I think, Avin, you and I basically share a lot of similar feelings about climate change. You are the rare unicorn in the conservative circles that actually believes climate change is a thing. It seems like you believe the science on it. Is that right? Am I correct? I'm not putting words in your mouth.
I would say that's probably a pretty fair assessment. I mean, there's definitely some disagreements on the level of hype and fanaticism around it. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, I think the evidence is very strong. I think that anyone that's trying to argue against the evidence is in denial or being paid. They've got some sort of financial interest in it.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of things that I've read in the national news about, especially Joe Manchin. It's a coal state. There's a lot of interest with him getting money from coal people to keep the status quo the way it is. And I think you will be surprised at my conclusion, or at least some of my whatever at this. Not that it's fake or anything, just... but yeah, I think in opening, since this was my choice, I'll open. The idea is, I think that I've been reading a lot, and I shared with you. I didn't share it for the general notes. But there is this sense of, not just for the one person I talked to, I listened to a podcast with a scientist and an activist. I didn't write his name down. But there's been other people in the scientific community. There's this idea that everybody says, what are the good things? It seems like the news, left or right, always said, well, the right usually doesn't say that it's a thing. But when the left says, what are the good things with climate change? What are the gains that we've made? It seems like there's a lot of talk in the scientific community about really focusing on the gains, which is important. But I think what I've been reading lately is there's a lot of scientists saying we need to be more aware of these things and be more panicked about them. And that isn't to mean that we're going to need to start riots or anything like that. But the reason why there is a big change in life, or like if you get panicked in real life or feel a sense of urgency, that means you will change something. And I think lately there seems to be this feeling that, we're going to be okay. But some of the scientists are saying we can't think like that, because then you get complacent with change and you just think, okay, well, we'll just keep the status quo the way it is. And I think there is this alarming thing in the scientific community of, like, we need to do something right now, and we can't keep saying, oh, maybe by 2050 we'll do this, or, because that was the COP26 thing, was like 2050 zero emissions. And it's like, why say anything at all? That's so far away and so little change, I think, but I think you'll be very surprised at my whatever when I read about all this. So what do you think, opening statements wise, about that? idea.
So, I mean, we've talked about this quite a bit before, and sort of my position, climate change is real, be it man-made or be it natural. Although my personal position is that the Earth has its own natural cycles, and I think we've already been in a long warming cycle for quite some time, and I think that the industrialization of the world, so, you know, it started off in the Western world, industrialization, and we continued to move in that process, and now you have developing world that's moving into heavy industrialization and using a lot of dirty power. Although they have an edge in that they're coming in now, so they can start off in cleaner energies than we did. The genie's out of the bottle, right?
Right.
Like we've already started the process. We've already added the greenhouse gases and had other impacts on the planet that can't be stopped. So for me, like, yes, we have to act, and I don't think that's wrong, but I really don't appreciate the panic-inducing attempts of so many people in the scientific community and the press, because it's not working anymore, right? Like, the general population has just sort of given up, and so all you really have are the activists. Then the small percentage of the population that's like, oh, well, I own a hybrid, or, you know, I have an electric car, and so I'm doing my part. That isn't really enough, but because it's been at such a high level of the world's going to end, the sky is falling for so long, I think that people are tired of it. Kind of like we are with COVID, right? Like, here we are now in
Year
Omicron
two.
world, and everyone is sort of like, whatever.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit that and say, well, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I will say that the Democrats from the very beginning have been like, we're gonna die, basically, right? The sky's gonna catch on fire, and maybe it wasn't back in the day, but it is the boy that cried wolf. Now I think we're at a time, like an inflection point, like a lot of scientists have pointed out, and so instead of just saying, well, it's been doom and gloom for so long, forget it. But scientists are saying, no, this is the point, you know, that we are at that point. But again, you don't have to believe them or whatever or disagree. And I will say I agree with you when it comes to personal responsibility, because there's been a lot of pushback by the fossil fuel industry when they say, well, you know, we are producing less plastic, and, you know, you can get a hybrid and all this stuff. And it's like, then you see photos of the Gulf, which it was several months ago. I don't know if you saw the footage. It was like a 30-second clip. It was from a news chopper. It was an oil rig caught, like the pipe caught on fire, and it looked like a sci-fi movie. And it's like, somebody pointed out, it was a Twitter comment, obviously, but I think they had a really good point. They said, listen, no amount of personal responsibility is going to stop this. You know, no amount of me getting a hybrid and using cardboard straws and not using plastic bags is going to stop the oceans from catching on fire. And so really the pushback I've seen in the scientific community is really on the fossil fuel companies of like, hey guys, it's no longer good enough to say, oh yeah, we're working on hybrids too and stuff. It's like we're past that point. And so I don't know.
Well, and I mean, to that point, I would agree, right? Like, I mean, we've been listening to this since the 1990s, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I just looked up, An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, right? Like,
yeah, I watched that too. I forgot that came out so long ago, but yeah.
They, the left, specifically Democrats, have been beating this drum for so long, and it hasn't really visibly come or impacted most American lives in such a way that to escalate at this point in time just is hollow and empty, right? Like, never waste a crisis kind of a scenario. And so the severity of the situation is kind of, no one really cares. Like you said, boy cries wolf.
Yeah, it was one thing I didn't include in the notes, but there was a PBS video for kids for like climate change, and the first thing they said when they opened it's for kids, and I watched it. It was on YouTube, and the guy said we don't have. I don't know if you said this, but as humans, maybe you said it on the phone. We always talk about this stuff beforehand, so I get confused on opening statements. But the guy said, as human beings, we have a terrible time with foresight. So it's very difficult for us to look into the future and say, this is going to be a problem.
Yep.
And that was the number one thing they said is climate denial at the time, whenever the video was recorded. And there was a lot of graphics because it was for kids, so it was very colorful. But he said the thing is, like, we can't look into the future and go, this is going to be a problem later. We need to do something about it now. We're very much, the skies are on fire. We should probably do something about that now. I mean, we probably could have done something
Which is
sooner.
why we have a hard time saving for retirement, right? Because we have a hard time imagining what's going to happen in 30 years. But we know what's happening next week.
Right.
The other kind of point you made about like the fossil fuel industry like needs to act. This is one, or that point is one where I just get really frustrated and disappointed. And with conservatives in general, like, I don't really care if climate change is real or not in your mind. From a conservative viewpoint and from an energy production viewpoint, fossil fuel industries, like, why wouldn't you want to invest in this stuff?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
why
I
wouldn't you want to
that,
be the technology leader on these things as opposed to
right? That's
following?
the way I look at it, and that's always my last point with conservatives. It was like we always say that America is the greatest country in the world and that we push and we're the leaders. Why not be the leaders in this? And I said it's like gambling. If the worst that could happen is literally, the air is unbreathable. We can't drink the water. We don't have fish. We can't eat food or grow food. The best gamble is air is cleaner, water is cleaner. We have renewable energy like through solar or wind that is not dependent on a foreign country, and we're pushing technology in a way that makes us the leader in it. Like, why? That to me, that seems like a safer gamble than just say, well.
And I mean, the reality of the situation is, one way or the other, fossil fuels are going to run out. We know it. It's going to happen. So climate change isn't real. The planet's not getting any warmer because of anything that mankind is doing. It's just the natural cycles. Great. Okay, that's your viewpoint. Why not invest in this money so that we're the world leaders on it and that we're energy independent so that we no longer have to rely on foreign oil,
OPEC and that.
OPEC and everyone else.
Yeah, and no matter how bad the Middle East is, at least through oil, like, no matter what I feel about the Middle East, if there's a problem there, it's not dependent on our livelihood that we involve. It's like, okay, well, fine, go ahead and have the problems that you have, and it's just one of those things you just don't have to worry about.
And if you can make renewable energy production,
here,
battery technology better, like if we can advance those things so far that they're cheaper than the fossil fuel alternatives that we have, so that there's an economic advantage to using them. It also neuters Russia, who makes a ton of money through oil, Venezuela, who makes a ton of money through oil, and it really gives us a leg up on the world. It allows us to export IP, it allows us to export energy, products. So it's always been one of those things where I've always wondered, like, I don't, like, believe it or not, like, why aren't we investing in it? And if you're Exxon, if you're BP, if you're any of the large oil gas companies or any of the big coal companies, like, the fact that you're not putting tons of money in R&D to get yourself out of that industry is absurd, because it's going to die.
Yeah, because it's not even about putting yourself out of business. Like you said, we know there's not gonna be a drop of oil left, right? So like it's hard. So I mean, let's at least bring the articles into it. I got the one that I just brought up. The first one I sent you from the LA Times, which was how Exxon went from leader to skeptic on climate research. Basically, it was a bunch of documents that were found through much. I'll just read the beginning. This was written by three people: Katie Jennings, Dino Grandini, and Suzanne Rust on October 23rd, 2015. I'll just read the beginning. Through much of the 1980s, Exxon earned a public reputation as a pioneer in climate change research. It sponsored workshops, funded academic research, and conducted its own high-tech experiments exploring the science behind global warming. But by 1990, the company and public took a different posture. Basically, it goes on to say that why did they become a skeptic? And it says, quote, the answers gleaned from a trove of archived company documents and the recollections of former employees is that Exxon, now known as ExxonMobil, feared a growing public consensus would lead to financially burdensome policies. So basically, I read that as saying it was going to cost us money. Reading this article, what were your impressions? Because that's kind of what I got out of this is like, hey, we're not going to do anything about climate change because it's just going to cost us money in the end, and we don't want to spend any money on stuff. And that seemed a little strange to me.
I mean, kind of like I just said with why aren't we the front runners on newer battery technology and energy production technologies, renewable technologies? Kind of comes back to what they're talking about here, right? It's not about, is it the right thing for the planet or is it the right thing for mankind? It's really about the profit motive. And in this case, the executives at Exxon leveraged their money and their influence to protect their bottom line from taxes and other policies. Right. Because the reality of it is, if Exxon had come out and said, oh man, no, like what they're saying is real, like we've done the research,
right?
It hurts our business, but it's true, here's all the research we've done,
right?
Then I think the rest of the world might have raised their eyebrows a little bit more and been like, oh man, if an oil company that profits from this is saying this, then maybe we should take it a little more seriously. Now,
right.
That said, I mean, I'm not surprised they pivoted. I'm really not, because profit motive is a big motive. And
well, one of the things I didn't include was an older article that I found. It was also, I think, from the LA Times. Maybe not older, but there was an article that I read that really had data and they interviewed the scientists that did the original studies for Exxon and BP and all that. And the reason why they originally did the research is because, well, one, they wanted to know if it was real or not, right? If it was a possibility like in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And two, it was also driven by profit because I thought if there's climate change, we want to know how to drill and how to use the technology we have to still extract oil from whatever. And largely, the scientists that they all interviewed said everything that we predicted was very close to being correct, like within, it was a very close margin. And so they took that info and were like, this is really bad, right? So why don't we, again, bury it like they're saying in this article, like put it in a trove of secret whatever. There's a thing later on where they actually take a picture of one of the memos, and I'll just read this. In an internal draft memo from August 1988 titled The Greenhouse Effect, so that's 1988, a company public affairs manager laid out what he called the Exxon position. Toward the end of the document, after an analysis that noted scientific consensus on the role of fossil fuels play in global warming, he wrote that the company should emphasize the uncertainty. And they took a photo of the document where it says the Exxon position, which is to emphasize the uncertainty in scientific conclusions regarding the potential for greenhouse gases and urged a balanced scientific approach. Other documents in the archive indicated Exxon scientists had been researching the topic for more than a decade, outfitting an oil tanker with carbon dioxide detectors and analyzing and building models to project how doubling of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere would affect global temperatures. Data confirm that greenhouse gases are increasing in the atmosphere, Levine told the board, according to a copy of his presentation in the ExxonMobil archive. Fossil fuels contribute most of CO2s. The Montreal Protocol was something in 1989, which was signed by the United States. It was like a proto-Paris Accord. They wanted to phase out CFCs, which I remember were in fridges a lot, and they wanted to stop the hole that was growing in the ozone layer. So, yeah. And the reason why they said this came into the news is in 1988, there was actually one of the hottest and driest summers on record. It was caused one of the worst droughts in U.S. history in 1988. And then that summer, James Hansen, then a NASA climate scientist, told Congress global warming had already begun. His testimony, enhanced by the sweltering temperatures outside, prompted many Americans to begin taking the threat of hotter planet seriously. Time magazine even put the Earth on its cover as Planet of the Year. Crazy. Yeah. So, yeah, what did you, again, like reading all this in the article, I think this is, the other article was paywalled, so I guess we could talk about it, but I guess I'll read what, so basically I want to get the year right. So this other article, oh no, here we go. I was already, okay. So it was basically I can't read it because it was paywalled, which is weird because I read it and then sent it to you. But the oil executives were grilled by the Senate and by, basically what is going on with this whole global warming thing. And it was basically said in the article that a lot of, obviously, big oil, we're not going to be the ones to say, they said, well, we agree that it is a problem, but they weren't going to do anything to stop producing fossil fuels, obviously. And this is where my big surprise at the beginning of the podcast comes from, because reading this, I got really dejected, because they're basically admitting, like, even through that one that you can read, yeah, it's a thing, but what are we going to do? Because we've already kind of made our bed with fossil fuels, and we can't turn the clock around. You know what I mean? Like, we're just going to keep doing this. I guess we'll invest in solar panels and wind, but like, meh, and I'm reading this going, well, they're right. Like if we would have done something in the 90s, maybe something could have changed. And I got really depressed after reading that article that was paywalled, that you can't read. But it's basically them sitting there saying, yep. But, I mean, they basically couldn't say yep because the Senate asked them, are fossil fuels contributing? And, of course, they wanted to keep their jobs and their profit margin and said, we agree that something should be done about it. They were very passive about their role in what was happening, But, again, the other article we read says you knew what was happening, and you were just like, well, what? And so I got really dejected reading that article. So you couldn't read it either. So I'm basically just telling you what was in the article quickly.
I mean, it could be anything in there. You could be making all of this up.
There could be a whole thing about cats in there that I forgot. Yeah.
Cats are wonderful.
Yeah, we don't deserve cats. Yeah.
They're not from the profit motive, from the responsibility to, SEC and not damaging the company and avoiding lawsuits, right? Like they have to protect the bottom line of the company. And let's be honest, executives for most companies get paid in some form of stock compensation. So they want to keep the stock price up.
Profit sharing. Right.
Yep. So, if you look at, them being like, yeah, we kind of got to do something, but, we don't know what, and like you said, we've made our bed, so let's go for it. I mean, one of the things in the LA Times article that they say too is that, in the 90s, in the 80s, they were looking at like, oh man, this is going to cost so much money to change directions and to improve all of this. And yes, we would be in a different place if in the 1990s we had started making those pivots. Like, yep, it's going to cost a ton of money. Yep, it's going to take a ton of time, but we need to start making those pivots. We'd be further ahead in battery technology. We'd be further ahead in renewable energy technology. But I don't necessarily know how much further ahead. I mean, a lot of the leaps that we've made, that Popular Mechanics article you shared with me kind of separate from this, but about the solid-state batteries,
right?
A lot of that is driven by more modern computing capacity because they can use AI and better modeling to advance the tech. So could we have gotten to where we should be or not? I don't know. Could we have advanced electric cars further along? Probably. Could we have advanced hybrid technology further along? Probably. Could we have pivoted to, and in the 90s and early 2000s, probably the biggest tech we could have pivoted to that would have made one of the biggest differences is hydrogen power.
Yeah, I've heard that too as an alternative. And I'm not one of these liberal people that hate nuclear power. I mean, it's come a long way, and that's one of the things that people talk about is a necessity to move over to clean energy is nuclear power.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, nuclear power, it's so dangerous. I mean, there has been accidents, but again, technology is at a place where those are vastly minimized, you know, and yeah, and there's other, like you shared years ago, there's other elements we could use that have less of a half-life than what we use now, which is a half-life of what do we, like uranium's like thousands of years,
Tens of thousands.
yeah, and so like there's thorium, I think. There was other things that you shared with me that are like, yeah, it's got a half-life of 15 years, so, you know.
Yeah, I want to say it was about 12 years ago or so. There was a YouTube video circulating around of a guy discussing thorium reactors, lifter technology, so liquid fluoride thorium reactors.
Nice.
And you use a small amount of uranium, very small, to catalyze the nuclear reaction with the thorium, and then the thorium is the actual fuel, which gets burnt up in the actual reaction process. So you produce almost no radioactive waste using that tech.
That could be something we could be experimenting with right now. You know,
it's something, honestly, we should have been experimenting with, and China is experimenting with. What we're moving forward on in nuclear technology in the United States currently is still closer to what we've already proven as a tech. However, it's been researched, and it's easier to make those leaps and get that technology out right now, because even though we had started using lifter technology in the 1960s for submarines, I believe, or maybe it was aircraft. Yes, we were trying to power airplanes with nuclear reactors in the 60s.
What that
Your face says it all.
Like, yeah, what do they like strap stuff to the side of it? It's like they have room for the pilot and that's it. And they're like, I have no ordnance. I'm just flying from here to there. And like,
talk about a nuclear disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, because the transistor chip didn't come out till like the mid 70s, right? So just the size of the reactor on the thing must have been humongous on the plane or whatever.
I mean, the technology behind nuclear reactors in the 1960s and 70s is basically what most nuclear power plants that we use today are designed off of. You didn't need amazingly powerful computers to control them. I mean, you did need them, but it's a very kind of simple tech if you think about it. You use a radioactive material that's been processed to heat water to generate steam.
Yeah.
It's basically coal power, but you're using radioactive material to generate heat instead of a fire. So, anyway, yes, we could be much further along. Yes, I think that would have a very big impact, and if we had started investing in that tech back then, we could have made a big difference. Here's the reality, though. Climate activists, climate scientists, kind of the climate community as a whole is only just in the last 5 years starting to realize, like, oh, we should probably go nuclear, because that's the only way we're going to get there fast enough. And the reality of it is it's still not going to be fast enough, right? Like we're already seeing sea level rise in places around the world. We don't see it here in the United States, and it doesn't impact us, so it's easy for us to deny it, right?
Again, that PBS video that I'll probably show you it after, or send it to you, because I did find it on YouTube. Probably send it to you. It was one of those things where, yes, I'm not a scientist. I would like information like you would give to a kindergarten on climate change, and so I watched it. But that was the first thing the guy opened up with. Is it's more the moral and existential thing of like, we don't do well with things that are in the future, you know.
Yep. So, here we are at this point in time. How do you deal with it? And for me, as a conservative, I always come to things from the position of profit motive. Because when you look at conservative politics in the United States, and you look at kind of the Republican Party as the primary conservative party in the United States, what is the driving force behind a lot of it? Less taxation, less regulation. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. Less taxation, less regulation. If that's the motive you're going to go to, then drive people into change by reducing taxes in building nuclear power plants, incentivize companies to research this tech by giving them differentials on their other energy. Like, hey, if you reduce your your carbon emissions by this much by this date, like we'll give you a break of this much in taxes for this period of time.
Right.
If you invest this much money in tech, we'll, carbon neutral tech will give you this much money in tax breaks.
Yeah, a lot of people pointed out too that like just using like an electric car, although we do have to worry about recycling and things like that of the batteries. The idea is that you need less moving parts than you do a combustion engine, so that requires less maintenance. So that's another thing of like less regulation, less, because to piggyback off of your less regulation argument for conservatives, I can't imagine what would be less regulated than the sun. The idea that you put a solar panel somewhere and you are off the grid. I mean, they do it in some states now where people will put solar panels on their house and they get paid because the power grid will take power from their house when they're not using it or whatever. And
I actually think that's a legal requirement in the United States now. If you're giving power back to the electric company, they have to pay you or credit you.
Yeah, and then I've seen some really good. There's a YouTuber that does like a lot of new technology stuff, and he converted not only to solar panels, which he did a full video on that. It's like a 45-minute video and about the process, and it'd been like 9 months, and he was talking about getting paid where it's very little, but it's been going up, because now he's off the grid. But he also converted to 2 Tesla batteries.
So he's using power walls.
Yeah, and so he talked about he had some problems in the beginning because the electrician, although was familiar with them, the usage of your house varies, obviously, and he said I really needed to talk to not only Tesla, but the electrical company because your need changes, and like I needed more than they said, like, because they're rated, the power walls. It's like you're rated for this, and he's like, that should be good enough. But when they installed it, the electrician was like, you probably should have got either another one or the bigger unit, because although this is what's sustainable, that's like the minimum specs, like on the PSU world, that's the minimum specs for what you need, but you may need the maximum specs sometimes for colder months or, whatever. So he said it was all a process, but he said it's been pretty amazing to be off the grid, or at least on the grid enough to get paid. And that's the kind of stuff where I didn't bring it into the conversation because the guy was more of an activist, but he also is a scientist, the podcast I've been listening to. But that's the thing where he says that's something where people can do, where you literally calculate your carbon footprint and start reducing it. And the other gentleman on YouTube that hooked up to solar panels, he's greatly reducing his carbon footprint because he's not burning natural gas anymore. He's not whatever, like, so that kind of stuff. If you want to make a difference, you can do stuff like that, so I don't know. Like, I think reading all this was just very depressing to me because I was like, well, what's the point? But I think, I didn't tell you this, but I talked to a friend of mine, and we were talking about it, and he's conservative, and he's very much like, screw it, clean energy can't get us there. We have to stick with fossil fuels. And I said, well, it's not really about us. It's about other, like your kids. He had kids. And I said, I don't want to bring your kids into it, but it's about your kids and your grandkids. So we either start to make a change now, or like what's going to happen, when they're
because cold reality of it is we started talking about this in the 90s when we were teenagers, and now our generation is the generation that has to deal with it because our parents' generation didn't deal with it.
Yeah,
keep kicking the can, and you're making the problem worse for the next generation.
Yeah, and I mean that's my other thing is I hate to be the liberal hippie, but the idea that it's no longer about profits. You talked about it, and you've been really honest about, it has lately been driven by profit margins, and you have to ask yourself, what is this worth then? Is it just about money? Because these companies are worth billions of dollars. So how much is enough money? And then when is it not about the money anymore? When you run out of oil? Because then we're all going to be SOL, of like, we have no more fuel, and we have to figure out a way to create some kind of energy, and, that's when I get this really philosophical thing of like, how much money is worth it? Is this all worth it? Is it like all this money that you're bringing in? Is it worth it? The fact that I brought up to you last year, I think we were doing this podcast. I mean, it's not that bad today, but like in December, it was like 55 degrees in Washington, which is completely unheard of. Like I was wearing a t-shirt, and I mean, I know we're temperate here, but like usually it'd be like, I would say like mid 40s and raining, and you'd have to wear a jacket. It wouldn't be miserable. But whenever I run into a conservative that says it's not real, I'm like, well, I mean, I have eyeballs and skin, man. Have you looked around lately? Like I grilled in my barbecue this morning, because it was like clear and 45 out, and I was like, well, and then I was like, the 19th of December. What am I doing? I should be inside playing video games because it's wet and cold outside. It's like it's going to be harder and harder to deny this stuff, as time goes on. And it is getting harder. I've seen some conservative people go, well, I mean, it's already as bad as it's going to get. And you're like, wait a minute, like 4 years ago you said this wasn't real. So, yeah, I don't know.
So there's that part of it. People are beginning to pivot and start to see the evidence. And in our day-to-day lives, warmer weather in the winter, more extreme weathers in the summer.
Yeah,
that's what people are.
We had a heat dome in the Northwest. It was like 110 degrees or whatever. And so that's just a lot of scientists say it's going to get worse.
So that's where people point to say, like, this is the evidence, this is proof. And yet, I wish I could remember his name. I remember over the summer when we were having this super hot weather and everyone was like, this is climate change, this is a proof of it. And they were interviewing a climatologist from the University of Washington who is liberal, but he's a climatologist. And he's like, no, like, this isn't proof of global warming. Like, this is just natural weather patterns that occur. And yes, we will see that in the future of more extreme weather, but you can't point to like one-off sequences or even a couple to say this is climate change, but people do it and they hype it. And that was kind of his position. I'm definitely ad-libbing because it's been a long time since I listened to it. But the evidence that we're looking at that should be really considered is the receding of glaciers, receding of the polar ice caps.
Yeah, and the fact that those take a long time to build up, like thousands of years to build up the levels that they should be and stuff like that. So
the increase in sea level that we're already noticing, which is not really a whole heck of a lot at the moment, is already beginning to impact coastal communities that are getting higher tides, that are legitimately, it's like third world countries, areas in Asia and India where, the poor are living on the coastlines. And their communities are already beginning to be underwater to some degree.
There's already refugees. I mean, I didn't bring the article in, but in places like in Africa where they farm, they can't grow anything. They're having to move to different places because there's a migration now happening because of climate change. You're not able to grow certain crops and things, because it's too hot
So kind of coming back to that though, like we live in Washington State, one of the greenest states in the country from a climate green perspective. Not green from our trees, although we're also one of the greenest states in the country.
We are the evergreen state.
Yeah. But
that's the only slogan I remember for the states. There's 49 other ones I do not remember.
There's been a push for... Oh man, I can't remember it. There was a big push this summer for a new tax that was cap and trade,
right?
Which really was just a carbon tax,
right?
But a weird way of naming it, and I don't understand why that's how it was named. But anyway, there was a big push for it, and a conservative local radio host, Dory Monson, was talking about like, okay, why are we pushing for this? This is hurting middle-class working Americans that have to commute because they can't afford to live in Seattle. They can't afford to live near Seattle. So, the working-class families that work inside Seattle so they can get paid more money are commuting 45 minutes, an hour and a half to get into the city are the ones that are paying more in taxes and are actually being hurt by it because it's a huge percentage of their monthly expense. And now we're adding even more in taxes. And in Washington State, we're already like number 2 or 3 for most tax on gas in the country. And with the cap and trade proposal, it's going to ramp up to like 90 cents more a gallon than we're already paying or something like that over 5 years or 6 years.
Which, bringing it back to the fossil fuel companies, why are we as middle-class people paying that tax? When your profit margin for the quarter is in the billions, you think it could maybe be fewer billions and they could pay because they're... I don't know.
When you're a state, you don't have the leverage to go after and tax these corporations for the distribution of it, right? And let's just be honest, Washington State, we're one of the most heavily taxed states in the country. And my own personal opinion, our legislature, our governor, just kind of looks at us as a wallet that they can turn upside down and shake for more cash.
Well, I mean, I don't have a lot of cash left, but
I mean, we're just so heavily taxed and we keep adding it. So the point Doria was getting to is like, why are we pushing this? Washington State is something like 0.02% of annual global emissions. Like, we're already one of the greenest states in the country. We already have one of the highest concentrations of electrics and hybrids. The state's already pivoting away from a gas tax and into a road usage tax because they're losing too much money on the gas tax. So, like, why are we trying to do it this way when countries like China and India that are developing are the ones pushing it? Which is why I brought it up, because of the other article that we haven't gotten to yet.
We got one more article, and the only reason I brought it up is from the Blaze. And they basically said that China is this is written by Chris Enlow on May 10th, 2021, so this year. And he basically says China produces more greenhouse gas emissions than any other developing nation in the world combined. A new report from the Rodenheim Group exposes China... Rhodium Group exposes China as the world's overwhelming leader of greenhouse gases. Researchers said China is responsible for 27% of all greenhouse gases emissions in 2019, nearly 3 times the amount of emitted by the United States, more than any other developed world combined. And the U.S. contributed to 11%, while India and the European Union were each 6%. The reason why I included this article is that is correct, from what I can tell. China is producing more greenhouse gases than anybody else, but because we have a propensity for cheap goods, most of the goods in the world, in the U.S. and abroad, are being produced in China. So to me, the way I look at it is China is this basically country that consists of factories that build us cheap stuff. And so if we were building more of the things that we build in China here, I think that percentage for them would be lower and for us would be higher. Is that a reasonable assumption if we produce more things in the States?
Probably. There are some challenges to that, like China's population density is
much bigger than ours.
Preposterously huge compared to ours.
Yeah, it's like over a billion people. Well, I mean, but that's my thing is like the conservatives like to say that, and my friend said that too when we spoke about, China's producing a lot of greenhouse gas. It's like, yeah, but they're also producing like a lot of goods for other countries, and so that is
but if you're looking at energy use as kind of the argument for that, Joe, I would almost go like, it would be curious to do a side-by-side per capita comparison of electrical usage. And the only reason I say that is because in the United States, we spend a lot more electricity in other areas than in factories and production. And one of the biggest areas that we spend a lot of energy on is data centers. And I mean, talk to anyone about kind of data center design. You look up any of the research on it, like most data centers are near electrical generation facilities. Like there's some in Eastern Washington because they're close to the Grand Coulee Dam, so they can have a reliable, steady source of electricity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they spend absurd amounts of electricity on cooling because you have all of those servers and networking equipment and all of the storage equipment that they run that burns electricity but generates a massive amount of heat. And electronics don't like to be hot.
What?
Yeah. So I would be curious to see on a per capita basis, if you looked at electrical usage in the United States and compared it to electrical usage per capita in China, I think that argument kind of falls flat on its face. The reason China is producing so much more global greenhouse gas emissions than the United States or anyone else is because there is no regulation in China. Like, the Chinese government doesn't care. Now, with that said, I will say the difference between the United States government and the Chinese government. As a communist, totalitarian government, China is investing massive amounts of money in nuclear power because they know they're dependent on foreign countries for fuel.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be. China wants to be the economic powerhouse of the world. They will overtake the United States in our lifetime as the economic powerhouse of the world. Because they think in 100-year plans and we think in 4-year cycles.
Oh, right. Well, that's another thing I wanted to bring up. I guess this is a time for we're getting towards the end, so our closing thoughts. But one thing that I've read and really struck a chord when I was in my depression after reading the the New York Times article was the fact that, you know, our policy has to outlive a 4-year term limit or a 2-year term limit of a congressperson or Senate person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you could come in and say, climate change is real. We need to do something about it. Here's my policies. This will take X amount of years to develop. And the next administration can come in and say, this is not a priority at all. We need to gut this program. We need to put money in this other pot. And so then you run into a problem with, and you can't do like an executive order, because obviously we've talked a little bit about that before, but like the idea that you can just come in and sign a piece of paper and negate what the other person did in X amount of years also creates a problem for green energy or...
And that's a huge issue in the United States. Like, we have this tendency to kind of seesaw back and forth between parties, be it in 8-year or 4-year cycles. Right. And then the next administration comes in and they tend to come in with the rest of their party and they undo stuff that they didn't like. And then the next party comes in and undoes stuff that they don't like and redoes stuff that they want back. And that's an issue. And there is a solution to that, but it's something we're moving further and further away from, which is bipartisan participation in these laws, making compromises and meeting in the middle. It's much more likely to stick than when you come in and you pass extreme changes.
Right. I mean, but that's hard too. And again, it will take more than, you know, people using cardboard straws or whatever. You know, it's really difficult. So, I mean, I think that's my big closing thought. Is reading this, I was very depressed, but I guess I look at it as, I suppose I can try to do the best I can and, like, you know, carpool and all that kind of stuff, you know. Like, I don't know. It was depressing reading this, I'll say that much. Or slightly hopeful.
You know, at the end of the day, the disappointing thing for me is you know, the United States as the leader that we were in the world for so long, technologically, educationally, economically, militarily, foreign aid, and everything else that we let in for, you know, 50 years following World War II, 60 years following World War II, depending on where you want to argue, we've started to diminish. It's sad to me that we have chosen to maintain the status quo and not push forward on the technology that will be the future of the world. Like, we are acquiescing to falling behind. And that disappoints me. Now, I do think there's a lot of people that want to push it forward. At the end of the day, I'm a huge believer in human motivation. We talked about this when you were telling me about the climate scientist that was like, we don't have a choice, like, we have to stop now. And, you know, I was arguing like that's just unrealistic. It's not possible. Humans won't do that. But how do you leverage human psychology to push forward things like that? And here in the United States, it's really difficult because our political system is becoming so much more divisive. We're more and more and more hating the other side, and we're failing to see where we're common.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to bring this up. I did do some real quick research on what I was just saying about China and the United States. And the United States per capita kilowatt hours per person, well, per capita per person. In the United States, kilowatt hours per person per year, whenever this report was taken, it's at Wikipedia. The U.S. is 12,154 kilowatt hours per person, 12,154, versus China, 5,312.
Yeah.
So, like, we're using substantially more electricity in the United States, even if we're not producing as much. Yeah. So, just to bring that point up, too.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, what do you think, your closing thoughts about all? I mean, you kind of said, you know, it's, to me, it is about the money, right? You have to tell people it's more important than the money, and that's really difficult to do.
Well, yeah, you have to make it... The reality of it is it's more important than the money. At least, for me, that's how I view it. I don't want to say that's the cold, hard fact, because my perception and your perception of facts are going to be different. On this, we agree. But it's more important than the money because, like, let's just be honest. This is our home. It's where we live. We don't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah, we don't have a plan B.
You know, even if even if Elon Musk achieves his goal of getting
There's more of
humanity
them?
to Mars,
Actually, there is. He had a kid. There's more of them.
even if he achieves the goal of getting us to Mars, like, it's going to take us forever to make it a livable environment. Like, we're not going to be able to move anywhere near a significant number of people
Compatible.
to the planet where it would provide any level of protection should we destroy our own planet. But human nature, the way the world is wired, people don't see that far ahead. People don't think that far ahead. And again, this is why people don't invest in retirement. This is why people get to the end of their working lives and go, oh crap, what am I going to do?
Yeah, I don't have any money.
I'm going to have to keep working into my 70s because I don't have any retirement. What was I thinking? Well,
Right.
you were thinking, how am I going to buy groceries this week?
Yeah, it's to me that's what it is. It's just yeah, and I'm actually, you know, my car is dying, and I've been looking at electric cars, and I like Ford, and they've come out with some new electric models, and so I'm going to talk to my wife and see. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. There is a tax break. Maybe that's something we could do, you know, to.
So I'll just make my case because I know how much you have to drive around. If
Well, I have
I
a
were,
work van.
well, it's true. You do have your work van for getting around a lot more, so maybe electric is good. But for where you live and for your home, your only real choice to charge is going to be dragging a cable out.
Right. Well, the only thing I'll say in my favor is at work, like 4 people have electric vehicles, so they do charge them at work. So I would just be another person that would plug their car in or their thing in.
Well, yeah. Okay, so if you've got a recharging station at your work, that's great.
Yeah.
But like at home, you'd have to drag a cable across your yard. Let's just be honest. There's some unsavory people that walk up and down your neighborhood at night when you're in bed.
No, that's the thing. Like, at least have enough charge to get to work to charge it all day, because I'd be running the work van around, and it actually is pretty energy efficient. But then driving, I mean, that's the thing is, like, what can I do? Because apparently I can't wait for ExxonMobil to be like, it's worth it for us. Like, I have to do it, which is, again, kind of ridiculous. And it worked too. Like, all these people saying, well, it's, you know, you guys have to take personal responsibility. It's like, come on, man. All right, I guess we have to. I suppose, because you're not going to do it. So
More and more
BP.
people are, because, you know, human nature. We don't think of the future very well. Like your PBS kids thing talking about it. Like, we don't see the future very well. We don't think of future risk very well because we're not wired for it, right?
Yeah.
Well, we don't plan for retirement very well, but a lot of people do. And so a lot of people will plan for retirement in, like, I want to live on a planet where I can still breathe the air, and where, like, I'm not going to be living on rations because we can't grow enough food.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start making changes that I can. Lisa and I just bought a hybrid, admitting driven by 2 different factors. 1, economic impact. But 2, it does allow us to reduce our footprint. And, you know, hybrid technology, the hybrid that we bought versus the gas model of the same vehicle, the hybrid is actually the more high performance. And my last tank of gas, I went from my previous vehicle at 26 miles to the gallon on average to 41 on my last tank.
Wow. Oh, with the hybrid?
Yep. So I'm like, dang.
Well, the ones I'm looking at, I like Ford. I'm one of those people, because everybody will do the acronym
I like
thing
Ford.
or whatever. Yeah, but they have a 100% electric trucks that can haul. I think it's called the Lightning. But yeah, I was going to talk to my wife about it. Hey, I know it's expensive, but there's also a credit, and if we can swing the credit enough, I mean, with that, because it's going to be difficult to get a car anyway with the chip shortage, right? So if I know I'm going to be waiting, why don't I get the thing that I want to get and know I'm waiting anyway? You know,
And
instead of
that was
I'm
something
waiting,
else Lisa
so...
and I ran into, right? Like, we bought the car 2 weeks ago, and we called, and they're like, oh, there's a 2-week delay. Or no, there's like a 2-month backlog.
Yeah.
And that's if you don't want to order something that's hard to get a hold of. If you want something that a lot of people want, like, it could be 3 or 4 months. We got lucky that someone else canceled their order so they could upgrade to something else. That's the only reason we got it. If you want to get a vehicle that's a high demand vehicle, yeah, you're going to have some time to wait to get it. with the chip
Well,
shortage.
I guess it's good because I could just save and they could run the credit and say this is what you got to pay and here's a credit. That's probably going to be a process, of working out a tax credit and all that kind of stuff. And if I do it at the beginning of the year, it's probably better than, I don't know. But I was thinking of doing it in January because I have some time off and, I'd have time to literally sit in their office because you know what that's like. You just did it and you have to sit there for a while and be like, okay, I guess this is all day. So yeah. So I guess that's our conclusion. And again, to tie this back to grief, people are going to be affected by this. People are losing their coastal homes. There's been refugees that have had to move to different parts of the world because it can no longer grow food. Things are not sustainable. And existentially, to tie this back to like, hey, again, there's only one planet and we're all going to have to deal with this stuff one way or another. I mean, people are all over are going to be affected by this. So this is not something that is particular to one set of race or creed or nationality or even political party. Like everybody's going to be affected by the fact that, so it seems pretty straightforward. So Avin, before we go, what do you want to plug like we normally do? What are you plugging at the end of this? Your plug away, sir.
Well, kind of like I always talk about, I have my real estate business. Check it out, youragentguide.com. The well, that's about it. Email address for me there is avin@youragentguide.com. You can check out the webpage. I do put out content on facebook.com/youragentguide with just kind of basic tips and information on the market on a regular basis. So check that out if you have any questions, interest in the market. I'd love to answer those questions or look at the content. If it can be useful, great, because I'm here to help. That's my whole purpose.
Yeah, and I've said it many times, use someone that can help you because especially if it's your first time getting a house, I know that I was woefully unprepared. You were probably more prepared because you'd been in real estate for a while when you got your house. But there's always something where you're like, wait, that's a thing? And you have to deal with it, and especially if it's your first house. So, I just like to plug my other podcast. I sent you some stuff that you liked with my other podcast. We talked about Activision Blizzard. My podcast is the Gaming with Grief podcast with me. It's a solo podcast, but I had Avin on. The Activision Blizzard thing heated up when some people were at the walkout and they handed out union flyers. And there's a fund now set up for Better ABK, Activision Blizzard King. I forgot that they bought King, the people that make Candy Crush. So those people are striking and they're handing out unionization stuff, and there's a fund if you want to help people kind of pre-union obviously pay their wages. You can donate to the fund. So I think in that episode we did talk about, hey, support these people where you can. Definitely look for that GoFundMe. And yeah, my podcast has to do with gaming and grief and all that kind of stuff. I just finished a podcast this morning. Please go to that. It's called the Gaming with Grief podcast with Joseph Carlson. Please support me there. And I think if you like this podcast, please tell your friends and family about it or whoever you think is cool, you want to know the cool stuff. Avin, since it is your choice next month, what are you picking for a topic? Because we had a phone call where we talked for about 30 minutes a week ago about what we were going to cover and everything, and you had about 3 or 4 different things you were covering. So what is the thing that you want to cover next month in the podcast?
So the whole reason I called you, because I had that idea, was so that when it came around, I wouldn't forget, and now I have forgotten.
Well, there was like 4 topics, and we talked. Like you and I always talk, and one of the reasons we do this podcast is because it's like a quick call that turns into an hour of us talking about politics. And so you will be forgetting that you had 4 topics where it's like, well, that's really interesting, and what do you think about this? And we talked about that for a good 45 minutes to an hour. So I guess it'll be a surprise, but you know what it is. I know on that phone call, I mentioned the Supreme Court. I wanted to talk about the Supreme Court because I think it's an amazing topic, but that's my topic. You can't take that topic. It's mine. You could. I don't really care.
Yeah, I wish I remembered what it was. Like I had this epiphany of an idea, like I really want to talk about this thing, and we did end up talking about it extensively, and I can't remember what it was.
Well, you know what? It'll be a surprise. You know when we said we weren't going to do surprise anymore, we totally lied, and we're doing surprises. So, Avin, you will tell me closer to the beginning of next month what you planned, probably after the holidays or whatever, so we can prepare that.
Sure.
This podcast will hit every month. Again, this is Grief of Politics podcast with Joseph Carlson and Avin Carroll. Go to gwgpodfellows@gmail.com, write us a line, let me know what you think of the show, or Avin, what you think of the show. Sorry, I just did my other podcast, so my promo for my other podcast is in my brain. Yeah, you can do that. Or go to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast there. And again, tell friends and family about it. Write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com and let us know what episode you listened to, what you thought about it, and if you have a question, remember to mention that episode in the subject so my brain doesn't get confused. I will let you know. I'll be very surprised if I get an email because I just finished episode 135 of my other podcast, and I've gotten a lot of terms of service emails and a lot of welcome to such and such for that, but I haven't got any real feedback. So that'd be cool if I got a piece of feedback about either of the podcasts. So anything else you want to say, Evan, before we leave?
Nope. I don't think I've got any other kind of points to add. I think we went over this one pretty comprehensively this time.
Yeah, we're pretty confident. All right. Well, everybody have a good month, and we will talk to you guys next month. Bye.
Bye, everyone.